right, welcome everyone. We're here today to talk about the psychology of racism. I'm Dr. Risika from the Graduate Psychology Department at AIC, American International College in Springfield, Mass. And I have my good friend here, Zeta Govan, Professor Zeta Govan, who is a licensed social worker and a community activist. And she's going to talk about
the structural racism in the United States and how it affects us psychologically.
Together we're going to show you a PowerPoint with some videos, and we're going to hear the voices of people who have experienced racism, and we're going to talk about how this can happen in our society and how it continues to happen, and hence then we can start to eliminate it piece by piece. It's a long struggle. It's not going to be done overnight. We've got years of work ahead of us together.
And we're going to hopefully learn how we can move forward to continue combating systemic racism and what young people specifically can do to help us move towards the change that we need to see.
And we're so excited to see so many young people, not only from AIC here today, but also Job Corps in Chicopee, Mass. They're here to learn about what they can do to make a difference. So yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
All right, so first of all, let me define exactly what we mean by the psychology of racism. Now, psychology is the study of human behavior, and we look at how we think and how we feel and what we do. Now, with racism, it's racial prejudice plus power. Now, many of us may have had discriminatory thoughts or prejudiced thoughts, but it's when we have that power, that sense of superiority, or that sense of being above someone, is when we actually become racist. So we have to watch our own actions, and we have to be careful that our words don't become behaviors, or our thoughts don't become behaviors, because then we are actually involved in racist behavior. So I'm not the expert here. I'm going to have people who actually lived through racist experience share some of their experiences with you.
My sister-in-law, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together, so they're first cousins, and it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day. And Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me, and she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who is a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? Isn't it a nice day today? They're just chatting up, and she says, yes. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just a little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10, notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you gotta choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over, and she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been. She goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the two white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman. It is totally unacceptable. At which point, the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds. She goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege. And even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, this is unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
So how does something like this happen? I want to talk a little bit about learning theories in psychology. I want to talk a little bit on how this can actually become not only an individual behavior, but also even a systemic behavior. Clearly, that young woman treated her in a manner in which she learned. It just didn't happen at that moment. So let me just add a little psychology right into this PowerPoint right now. Let's talk about learning theories. Some of you may have heard of Pavlov, Skinner, and Bandura. 3 different types of learning theories. All of these can be related to racism. Pavlov talks about classical conditioning. Some of you may have heard about how he actually paired the smell of food and the ring of a bell with dogs until they started salivating when they heard just the ring of the bell. Now, how does this relate to racism? We human beings also pair things together. So if we had a certain experience, perhaps a negative experience with someone with certain characteristics, we then pair that with a bad feeling and may carry that through life. And we got to be careful that we don't ingrain that and also use that towards all people with the same characteristics. Perhaps that person was just having a bad day that day. Now with the operant conditioning, that's even more powerful, I believe, because that is what we're reinforced every single day with. If we're learning every day that something is okay to do, and we're praised, and we're actually put in positions of power because of that behavior, then we're going to strengthen that behavior and continue to use that behavior. Now with Bandura social learning, this is just us as human beings observing all our environmental playgrounds and what people are doing out there in the playgrounds. And when I use that word, there's children's playgrounds, but there's also adult playgrounds. We see how people interact with one another and we learn from it. So Bandura, what he did, he did an experiment where children watched other children beat up on this Bobo doll. Okay, so what happened then? Well, then they thought it was okay to beat up, not only on the Bobo doll, but each other. So they became more aggressive. So what Bandura tells us is if we get these messages, whether they're concrete or subtle, that things are okay to do, then we as human beings feel we are allowed to act that way. So we need to be careful of the information we're getting from our environments. I added Piaget in here. Jean Piaget spent hours, hundreds of hours watching children. And he came up with a number of different theories of cognitive development. But 2 very important pieces is one, the egocentrism of the human beings. He says that starts early on and is strongest early on, but it remains with us. We perceive our environments through our own needs. Now also we have schemata where we build categories within our minds. And Piaget tells us that we start to categorize people also. So at first the young child might think that every male, oh, daddy, daddy, no, and then they learn. Or they might think that every 4-legged animal is a dog, and then they learn that there's more, and they begin to add to their categories, and that's the schemata. So what does this have to do with racism? Let me just go to the next slide and talk a little bit more. Now you see a picture here of very diverse people. Now someone may look at that and say, because they learned from their environment, wow, that's a really interesting page there. I wish I could talk to each and every one of them. I'm certain they have fascinating stories. Or someone could say, oh, well, I'm indifferent. I don't really care. They're different than me. I don't want to know. Or someone could say, oh, no. We have to be careful. Those people might take from us. So how we perceive people and how we categorize them all depends on what we've learned from our environment. I'm going to give you a very brief story now. One day I went to dinner in Boston with my sister and her husband, my husband and my 3 kids, and my sister's husband said, "You come in the car with me, Lena, and my wife will go with your husband, so in case we get cut off in Boston traffic, he'll know which way to go." Well, he and I got there first. And I have to tell you a little something here. He is a very dark Jamaican man. And he and I walked in, and we stood there, and the hostess walked by us not once, but 4 times. Didn't make eye contact, didn't say, "How are you tonight?" or "I'll be with you in a moment." Not a word. And I thought, well, wow, they're really busy at this restaurant. In comes my sister with my husband and my 3 unruly teenagers, and she walked past us again and went immediately to them and said, "Oh, how are you tonight? Table of 5? And my sister said, "No, table of 7. And we kind of just followed them in. And I sat down and I said, "What just happened?" And my brother-in-law said, "Keep it quiet, calm down." And I went home and I thought about, I'm still thinking about this, and it's 15 years later. I experienced by his side the invisible man. You ever hear of that? The invisible man. Never really thought it was true until I experienced it. So that's another thing to think about. Just because you didn't experience something doesn't mean it's not real. A little more from psychology. Everybody know about this study here? Milgram is often cited when we talk about unethical research, because this researcher had people shocking other people on the other side of the mirror, but they weren't really shocking. They thought they were. They thought they were giving shocks, and people were willing to go as high as lethal shocks when they were told to do so by the authority. Even when they said, "Well, no, I'm done." "No, you have to. You agreed to this study. I am the authority." He was dressed up in a white coat like a doctor and said, "You need to go further." 65% of people went up to the severe shock, even when they heard people screaming on the other side. What this study tells us is that people feel they have to follow authority. And today, whose authority? I have a list up here. I mean, it's come down to even fictional characters. Any of you know Slender Man? And what he's caused in our society? Because young girls thought they had to listen to Slender Man, and they tried to kill their friend. So, and again, the message isn't always that obvious or that clear. Sometimes it's subtle and ingrained through our everyday living. Like that young woman who refused to acknowledge my brother-in-law. I still wonder to this day how she got to that point. This woman, Jane Elliott, back in 1963, and there's a YouTube URL there if you're interested in it, she immediately got children to be racist against one another through their eye color. So it wasn't so much because of their skin color, or maybe racist is the wrong word to use, but she was able to quickly make them turn against one another when they shared a classroom all year long and were friends. She told the blue-eyed students that they were superior and they were not to let the brown-eyed students have any extra time at recess, and the brown-eyed had to wear collars, and they were standing alone out in the playground, and they were treated very badly that day, and they even did very poorly in their schoolwork. That's very important to know. Within one day, their schoolwork declined. And then the next day she turned it around, and she had the brown-eyed be superior and the blue-eyed wear the collars, and once again, the same thing happened. And I want to note very clearly here that between both groups, they could not focus on their schoolwork. They could not do well on their schoolwork, and it took them a lot longer to finish their tasks. Imagine that in one day. So while they're getting that, it's just another slide about group conflict theory. And again, once again, very quickly, they were able to establish group conflict with the camp of boys that were told that the other camp was their enemy, that they were to compete with them and fight for the prize and fight for resources. And again, within the week, they had to stop the experiment because the boys were actually going at each other's throats. And what they did in the end is told these boys that together they had to save the camp because the water supply was down. And they had to fix that together. And once again, very quickly, they came together and worked side by side. So there's a lesson that we can, just like the Reverend said, send one message or the other. So we need to be careful about what we're doing and what we're saying in reference to which message we're sending, because again, it could be very subtle. It could be just the fact that a certain student or type of student gets chosen in a classroom to participate or to answer questions while other students are neglected.
Every black female has a big butt and big boobs.
Loud, obnoxious, ghetto.
Light skin being more attractive than dark skin.
We're not smart. We're this way, we're that way. And a lot of times we have to prove ourselves as not being true.
At a young age, I already knew the standards for a girl like me. As I become older, they become more obvious.
You have to have permed hair, relaxed hair.
You know, straight hair or like blonde hair, you know, long waves or something.
And if it's natural, that's good hair. Like bad hair is hair you have to relax because it's kinky.
Like it's not like appealing to have like natural hairstyles, or like if they are natural, they have to be like the curly head like black girls or something that looks mixed or something.
And I remember when I first started wearing my hair natural, at first my mom was okay with it and she thought it looked nice. And then after like the second day, she was like, oh, stop that. She was like, you're starting to look African. I was like, well, I am African. And that really pissed me off.
There are standards that are imposed upon us, like, you know, you're prettier if you're light-skinned.
I knew people in the past that just wanted to be light-skinned, not for any particular reason, you know, because they love themselves. I mean, they love themselves except for, you know, the color of their skin.
Like my siblings are all lighter than me, and my mom, she's dark-skinned, but she's lighter than me. So like I noticed, and I was like, hey, how come I'm the darkest, and you know everybody else is so light? And I don't know. Since I was younger, I also considered being lighter as a form of beauty, or you know, beautiful than being dark skinned. So I used to think of myself as being ugly because I was dark skinned.
I knew people who actually went out there and got, you know, bleaching cream and everything. They actually laid in the tub, poured capfuls of bleach into it just so they could see if their skin would get lighter.
But yeah, my aunt that lives in Honduras, she basically started using skin bleaching cream when she was about 25, and she started her oldest daughter on it when she was about 11, and then she has an even younger daughter that was about 6 when she started using the skin bleaching cream on her.
I've seen people say that I would never marry a dark-skinned man because, you know, because I don't want that in my gene pool.
I guess I sort of felt like there was not any attention towards me because of maybe my skin color, or because my hair was kinky, or you know, just basically that. Or even when I was younger, say there was I don't know, a doll. I used to have a lot of dolls, but most of them were just white dolls with long straight hair that I would comb, and I would be like, oh, I wish I was just like this Barbie doll.
In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll and a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you'd like to play with?
This one. I like that one.
Okay.
This one.
That one?
I like to play with this.
And can you show me the doll that is the nice doll? And why is that the nice doll?
He's white.
And can you show me the doll that looks bad? Okay. And can you and why does that look bad?
Because it's black.
And why do you think that's a nice doll?
Because she's white.
And can you give me the doll that looks like you? "15 out of the 21 children preferred the white doll."
Our ancestors came to this country and they were pretty much ripped out of their culture. You know, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't, they couldn't be themselves. They had to be like what everybody else told them to be.
When you don't know where you're from and you don't know what country you're from, all you know is basically you're from Africa, that's all you're given, I feel like it brings on like a lot of ignorance, and it builds a lot of anger. I've seen it build a lot of anger in a lot of black young females. Like, I don't know, they feel like because they feel like they have a right to disown any kind of, African roots.
I think for a black girl in general, it's like you're missing a piece of you, And for me, yeah, it's like, I don't have any actual heritage, not heritage, but culture. Like, I know I'm from Africa, but the different countries in Africa have their different cultures, their different morals, their different values, and not knowing that it sort of keeps us at a loss, and I feel like we're busy searching for it while everybody else in society is throwing their ideas and what they believe we should be at us. But personally, we know that's not what we should be, but we're gonna take it because we don't know exactly what it is that we should be, because we don't really know where we came from.
That's crazy, right? So where did they get that message? Young children preferring the white doll. That didn't come from family. That didn't come, it may have came from schools and friends. I'm sorry? Ancestors. But it also comes from the media, right? These messages, you see who's popular, who's not popular. And I know that's changing, and we're still working on that, and we need to continue to work on that. But look at what happens when she asked those young children. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about another psychological theory. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of my favorite theories, because he tells us every single human being has these needs: physiological, safety, to belong, esteem, to feel powerful, to know and understand. That's why you're here at this college. You're grasping, knowledge. Aesthetic needs. You want the world around you to look beautiful. Why do you think there's artwork on the walls and the landscaping on the campus? Yet some people live in poverty every day and don't see things like that. But then there's self-actualization and transcendence when you become the person you want to become. Does every individual in this country have these needs and these rights fulfilled? That's what you need to ask yourself. And what happens when one of these needs are not fulfilled? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to have a young man on video tell you. It's much shorter than the last one you saw. But before I do that, let me just talk about how there's a couple of different types of responses to racism. It can be engaging and healthy. That's what we're doing here right now today. It could be where you withdraw and you remove yourself from any type of uncomfortable situation. Vacillating, where you build your anxiety and you start to fear. You fear society, you fear people out there. You maybe even feel police officers. We know there's hundreds of thousands of good police officers in this country, but there's a few bad ones out there. But also, some people have built that anxiety so far that they see a police officer, they run. And there's a reason. Paranoia. So sometimes we submit, we become depressed, we have that learned helplessness, we give up, or we dominate with violence. And I say we as human beings, because every single one of us have that innate need to either fight, flight, or freeze when our adrenaline starts running or we feel that we're in danger. Every single one of us. There's no difference. And some people will fight Some people will run away, some people will freeze.
So when we're talking about systemic structural racism, all of the things that you said prior to this talks about the psychology of racism, how racism affects us psychologically. How many got angry when they saw the doll experiment, right? I every time I see it, and I've seen it a million times, I get angry. And those little kids weren't necessarily racist, right? What they were responding to was the systems telling them that white is right, right? Black is wrong, and if you don't look like that, then you're not good, right? That's what they were responding to. And nobody, I don't think, ever said, oh, listen, white people are good and black people are good. Nobody ever did that, but what they got was messages, right? From the media that Dr. Raysika had alluded to earlier, from messages that we get, when we go to the restaurant and, we're not served immediately, right? And when someone else walks in and they get served, all of a sudden they have room for people, right? So those are messages that we get on a daily basis from the television, and we need to be aware of that and figure out a way that we're going to change that. And because these systemic messages are going to continue, they're continuing today. So the effects of racism. So we have poverty, unemployment, discrimination, poor health care, schools and housing, racial profiling, a corrupt political system, and poor accountability for misuse of power. And we've seen that in the last couple of years. I know everyone has watched the television and have watched, and what's come to light, I think, is a lot, the police brutality thing. And what we hear a lot about is, people getting abused basically by, police officers who are not always white, right? But they're part of that system that they operate under. The latest one, I think, did anybody see I don't know if she was a high school girl who wouldn't put away her cell phone. The police officer went in and turned the desk over, and he got fired. I saw, my daughter sent me a news clip that said the white woman was on there saying, well, I don't think he should have gotten fired. He should have got reprimanded, but he shouldn't have gotten fired, right? And again, that's the white thinking and black thinking. There was a black guy on there, and he was saying he definitely should have gotten fired, and he should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, right? But those are two different views that they had. Can you hold that until the end, please? Write it down so you don't forget. Thank you.